Welcome to Motif TV. I'm Mike Ryan. Today we're pleased to have Mark Smiley, chair of the Rhode Island Republican Party, and Brett Smiley, mayoral candidate from the Democratic Party. We'll be moderating a discussion about gun tax laws and gun violence in Providence.
Great.
So let's start by talking about, there's a proposed law that you have been involved with. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So we proposed a 10% supplemental sales tax on all guns and ammunition sales statewide, the proceeds of which would be dedicated solely to anti-violence efforts and distributed statewide proportional to the amount of violence in each municipality, granted to each police department. Mm-hmm. And then the police department would grant it to community groups that have nonviolence or anti-violence training as part of their mission statement.
And what's the origin of this idea for you?
Well, we have in the city of Providence over 100 shootings last year. There's a tremendous cost to gun violence. In addition to the personal and emotional toll that it takes, there's also a real cost enacted on society by gun violence. And yet we have important groups in our community that are doing work to keep our streets safer, groups like the Institute for the Study and Practice of Nonviolence, Project Night Visions, and others. And what they lack is a permanent funding stream. And so while there's no substitute for an additional cop on the beat, there are other ways to keep our streets safe. And this is a way for us to pay for their work, to support their work, to keep our communities safer. And it's really inspired by cigarette taxes. Just like we ask the tobacco companies and smokers to pay for public health initiatives, I think it's fair to ask the firearms industry and those who prop it up to pay for anti-violence efforts.
And where is the proposed legislation right now in its process?
So it's been introduced with almost 10 sponsors between the two in both the House and the Senate. It will find its way to House and Senate Finance because it's a tax, and then to the floor if it gets voted out of committee. It has not had its hearing yet.
Okay. So there's a little while that this will be progressing for some time. Yeah?
Yes.
Well, on the surface, it has merit. Of course, gun violence in this state is a terrible thing. We don't want to see it happening. But to tax gun owners when just a tiny little percentage of the actual violence in this state is perpetrated by people that legally own guns. Just putting a tax out there, you may as well be taxing people that are buying oranges or something. It's not exactly related. If you want to reduce the amount of violence, period, in the state of Rhode Island, you have to come back to making Rhode Island more prosperous. The number one ingredient in violence is poverty. We have to improve that, and the gun violence will relieve itself.
I agree that a lot of the violence in our state has underpinnings in poverty, to be sure. But I do think that there is a correlation between gun owners and gun violence. So we know for a fact that lawfully purchased firearms end up in the wrong hands. We know for a fact that there are accidental shootings and accidents that occur. Mm-hmm. And then we have a loophole here in Rhode Island whereby you have to have a permit, what they call a blue card, in order to purchase a gun, but you don't need it to buy ammunition. And so we have people who illegally possess firearms but then go legally purchase ammunition. So I do think that there is a correlation between the gun violence and the cost that incurs and those who purchase guns in our state. And I also think that it's just a fair way to find funding to keep our streets safer and our neighborhoods healthier and stronger.
Well, wouldn't it be better to just simply require the blue card for the purchase of ammunition?
I do support requiring a blue card for ammunition, absolutely.
So that stops that problem. That's the end of that problem.
You know, there are many...
we are definitely against illegal ownership of guns.
Sure.
And we're not saying that there shouldn't be gun control. What we really need to do, there's two issues. There's poverty and there's mental health. We don't seem to be addressing the mental health thing at all. It's a difficult issue that we have to solve one way or the other. Trying to eliminate guns, there's over 300,000 guns in the state of Rhode Island. We're not going to easily get rid of all of those guns. It's not going to happen. A better way would be, let's figure out a way to address mental health issues. Let's address poverty. Just randomly taxing people that are doing something that's perfectly illegal. It's also part of their Second Amendment rights. Then we're just going to slap a tax on it because.
Well,
I mean, cigarettes are not part of the Constitution.
No. And, neither is the right to own 15 guns or an assault rifle or high-capacity magazines or the rest. There is a constitutional right to bear arms, but there's not a constitutional right to own an inexpensive gun and as many of them as you choose. And so I do support requiring a blue card for ammunition sales. I do support finding a way to include mental health in background searches. And I do support other gun control measures. But the reality is that there is still gun violence, that guns cause violence, that they are dangerous weapons. That's what they're designed to do. And so in order to keep our streets safe, we have to provide appropriate funding to both the local police forces and to community groups that are doing anti-violence works. And I think as a value judgment that this is something that I think is fair and reasonable to ask people to pay for. An extra 10% on either a box of shells or a new firearm isn't infringing on anybody's constitutional right, but at the same time providing a way to provide protection to the whole community.
It's penalizing people that haven't done anything wrong. As an example, the city of Chicago has the toughest gun control laws in the country. It also has the highest gun violence rate in this country. There was recently a Harvard study put out that can't find any correlation between stricter gun control laws and a reduction in gun violence. Guns don't create any violence whatsoever. It's the people behind them. We have to fix that part. Taking the guns, even if we were somehow able to actually take all the guns out of this country, you would have incidents like Pittsburgh where somebody's running around with two knives stabbing people. It's part of human nature. That's the part we need to address. I don't know whether that person has probably got some mental health issues, but there are usually some sort of indication that something's going to go wrong, and we fail to react to that. And to just randomly pick an inanimate object, which, yes, on rare occasions there's a misfire. With a gun, frankly, I've recently cut myself with a knife too, but we're not going to take knives away. You know, accidents happen.
Sure, but I don't think it's random that we've decided to tax guns. I mean, this is not choosing to tax oranges. This is taxing a tool, a weapon that is found in a majority of the violence in our city. And so you're right that the recent stabbing in the Pennsylvania schools was terrible, and we need to address violence in our schools and violence on our streets, no matter what the weapon was. It could be fists, from fists to shotguns. The reality is, and I think you and I could probably agree on this point, at least in the city of Providence, that the residents of Providence are overburdened with the taxes we currently pay. Our property tax, our car tax, our tangible goods tax, all of the taxes are near their limit. And so in order to find additional resources to provide for a safer and healthier community, it needs to come from somewhere. And so I think it's fair to ask those who feel compelled to own a firearm or multiple firearms to pay a little bit more. And I've talked to gun owners and I've asked them, while they may not agree with me philosophically, I said, will a 10% surcharge on your hunting equipment or your collector's guns, would that deter you from purchasing? They said no. I don't think that this is actually going to be a great infringement upon gun owners, but rather a fair and justified place to find additional funding to keep our cities and our streets safer.
I understand whatever you tax, you get less of, and whatever you supplement, you get more of. That's been a theory all along. In the city of Providence and throughout the state, the idea that we need to find additional revenue we've come to the end of that. We can't find more revenue. We need to figure out how to reduce the amount of revenue that we're taking from the people to allow them to create the economic prosperity that would solve the poverty issues here. Just not more revenue is not the answer. It just can't be. We can't do it anymore. The people of Providence are in that situation. We've got pension systems getting ready to collapse all over the place. Businesses are leaving in droves, and it's all because of the way we tax. We have to change the way we think about that. If New Hampshire can get away with $5.5 billion for a larger state, a larger population, what are we doing for $8.3 billion? Seems to me like we could cut back quite a bit, and we could have the economy that New Hampshire has right now, which is booming. It's going through the roof because businesses are encouraged to be there. it makes a lot of sense to be in New Hampshire and do business there. It's a New England state. It's got all of the same geographic issues that we do. It snows up there a lot more than it does. They don't have a deep water port like we do. We have advantages over them that we can take advantage of because we just tax people as much as we possibly can. And we've got to stop that.
Well, and this is where I've had been at forums and will be at another one here tonight with your party's candidate for mayor in our city. And I think, you and I can agree, and certainly he and I agree on the fact that there is efficiencies to be had in our city, and the quality of services that we receive in exchange for the taxes we pay could be a lot better. That value proposition is getting increasingly out of whack. I think probably where you and I would disagree is that I don't think that tax cuts or service cuts are the right way to address poverty in our city. I think that there's actually a lot more that the city should be doing to help and support the growth of families and their development in our city, in a city where there's a lot of real need. And so, I think we can agree that there's a better way to deliver services. Where we may disagree is over the way to go about to do that, and what level of services those should be. The fact of the matter is, though, that we have these interrelated challenges where we have students not receiving a proper education in our public school system. We have an economy that is either not growing or growing too slow. And we have real serious public safety challenges. And these three things are interconnected. One of the reasons that kids aren't learning at school is because they feel threatened. One of the reasons that kids are chronically absent or tardy is because they don't feel like they can get to school safely or home safely. And so addressing the public safety challenge in our city is also a way to address student performance and work readiness and our workforce issues, which all lead to a stronger, healthier economy. And so investments in public safety, I think, are also investments in a stronger education and a healthier economy. This is one way for us to make our streets safer, make sure that our young people don't have to fear that they're going to get to school safely or home safely. And while there's a lot more to be done on the actual running of the city government, we need to find ways to provide additional support to the people doing anti-violence work in our neighborhoods, particularly in the city of Providence, where we had over 100 shootings last year. And this is a fair and reasonable way to go about that.
That's a nice segue to ask what it is. The part of the plan is proposing what you'll do with the money that you raise through the additional taxes. What steps are you thinking that should be taken that aren't being taken right?
So several years ago, after the CNC administration was over and Buddy went to jail and the FBI were frankly getting ready to take over the Providence Police Department because of widespread corruption, we instituted a policing model called community policing. And then over the following almost decade, Providence reached a low level of crime, the lowest crime in 30 years. And it's because community policing works. And what community policing is forging partnerships between the police department, individuals in the community, and community groups, where as opposed to being at odds with one another, they become partners and they start to solve and prevent crime together. We've retreated a little bit from community policing, largely because of resources, because we're down about 20% the number of police officers we used to have. And one of the things that the way our bill is written, that I think will help reform those partnerships is the way the funds get distributed. So the money gets sent to each individual police department, except for in the case of Exeter, where it goes to the highest ranking police officer, civilian officer, because there isn't a police force. And if we estimate that this will raise about $2 million statewide, of which about $500,000 would come to the city of Providence. The city of Providence, like every other municipality, then would by law have to grant it to any nonprofit doing nonviolence work in their community. That's part of their charter. And then what that will do in effect is form this partnership. So you're going to have this working relationship. And frankly, I would love for it to create competition. And if this creates competition for additional groups to want to get into the anti-violence and non-violence business because there's funding available, I think that's to everyone's benefit and an exciting opportunity for more groups to start thinking about how can they be a part of stopping violence and preventing violence in our community. And so those partnerships get formed as the grants get made between the police department and the community. And on a yearly basis, they have to report on their work back to the General Assembly so that we know that this isn't a boondoggle or money being sent into the abyss, and so that there's a level of accountability to the taxpayers of our state.
Sounds to me like we want to take a disproportionate amount of money from places all over the state to correct problems in Providence. Providence has had a better situation when it comes to violence in the recent past. It needs to return to that. It needs to take care of its own fiscal house. But telling someone in Narragansett that they need to pay for that, that's not fair to anyone involved.
You ever go to Federal Hill?
Yes.
Yeah, there was shooting on Federal Hill this year.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that
there was a murder in Warren last year.
and
happen
Warren
all
would
over
get
the
it,
place.
and of course, and Warren would get some of the funds from this. But to your point about a disproportionate share coming to Providence, there's a disproportionate share of violence in Providence. But the capital
Because
city,
Providence needs to take care of its business.
the capital city is an asset to this entire state. And just like you go to shows in Providence and have dinner on Federal Hill, you want to enjoy a nice meal and feel safe at that meal. And so I don't think it's unfair to look at this as a statewide problem, because Providence and the assets that we have in Providence, our restaurants, our cultural institutions, are statewide assets.
Okay, that's a stretch for me, but
Well, how many residents throughout this
the city-state
state
argument.
come to Providence to go to PPAC, to go to Trinity, to go to great restaurants, to go to Waterfire?
they still do that. But the amount
But
of
they'll
crime that
stop-
goes on in Providence has been growing exponentially. But I don't see people
If we
stopping
keep
that.
having crime on Federal Hill, you don't think that that's going to impact people's decisions on whether or not they're going to come to the
I
city?
haven't seen it yet, but
Well,
Providence
I hope
needs
you're
to
right.
address their issue.
I hope you're right, because there was a stabbing at 11 p.m., which is not exactly the wee hours, with a death resulting in January. And that kind of violence is going to create an economic hardship, not just on Providence, but on the entire state.
So again, it was a different form of violence altogether than you're addressing with the gun tax.
Which is why the proceeds of this is going to go to address any sort of violence, not just gun violence.
But to penalize the purchasers of guns doesn't seem very fair.
I would argue that the money needs to come from somewhere, and this is a fair place to go. And I think that's where the rub is.
So if the programs you're suggesting would be effective and have been in place in the past and were effective, or at least variants on them, and were discontinued, if they're so effective, shouldn't they be able to find support in other ways?
So let's look at the example of the Institute for the Study and Practice of Nonviolence. And their marquee program is their Street Workers program, and this is a program whereby they hire former gang members to engage with the community and either counsel families about family involvement on gang activity, or even directly deter people from a life of gang activity. And they do not have a permanent, stable funding stream. They rely on individual donations, grants, and like many other nonprofits. As a result, like many other nonprofits, their funding ebbs and flows. And so there's flush times and there are lean times. And over the last 3 years, they've had periods where they've had to lay off street workers and then rehire them, move them from full-time to part-time, part-time to full-time, so on and so forth. One of the ways in which they're able to be effective is that they intend to be effective, is that they make a compelling argument that there's another life out there for you if you're a prospective gang member or a current gang member. And when you have to start thinking about the challenges that we as private citizens face, that I presume all three of us are not involved in gang activity,
Let's not talk about my weekend.
Exactly. and instead they're trying to make a pitch to someone to leave a gang, and they're looking at someone who gets laid off regularly. They're looking at someone who has to go on unemployment. They're looking at someone who, quote, gets their hours cut. It's not a very compelling argument to leave street life. And so in order for them to be effective, and in order for all of these programs to be effective, they need to have stable, steady funding, so that they're not constantly growing and shrinking, hiring and laying off. And so this is not sufficient funding to actually fund the entire program. It's not going to supplant the need for private fundraising, but will add a layer of stability and predictability that'll enable them to do their work in a steady, more consistent manner, and therefore be more effective.
And if I'm understanding you correctly, a big part of the objection is the one-to-one relationship between taxing people who are purchasing weapons and paying for help to parts of
gang
communities that
members
are
who possess guns illegally
right.
most of the time. So they're outside of that entire system. They didn't pay into that system at all.
Unless
Whereas
they
with
purchase,
cigarettes, people who smoke.
unless
they
they
don't
purchase, unless they purchase bullets legally.
Oh, if they purchase the ammunition, but the blue card should be used for ammunition purchase.
Or,
If
you know,
nothing
it's
else,
not
you guys
cost
have
enough.
agreed on that.
Yeah, that's
We have a consensus on something.
and I think that's terrific. We should head on up to the State House together.
Yeah, okay.
The you know, and the other is that, like, we need to talk about this illegal gun market, because it's not like there's a factory producing illegal guns. You know, all of these guns were purchased legally at one point.
Maybe,
Right.
maybe.
Well, they must be.
Well, no, they come from out of the country, and at that point, who knows what happened. So,
I suppose I think maybe we can agree that most of these guns were purchased legally at some point.
okay,
And so, you know, there is this implied market at some point that these were legal guns at some point in their life. And so, while I recognize there are many, and a majority of gun owners in Rhode Island are lawful gun owners, legally purchased guns fall into the wrong hands, either willfully or through neglect. And so I do think it's a fair correlation.
so if we removed all of the legal guns, do you think that the streets of Providence would have less guns on them?
If we removed all illegal guns,
No, legal guns. Legal guns.
well, Providence itself would have less guns, to be sure. But I think I think we can
It would
agree
have the
that
same amount, because you haven't addressed the actual illegal guns in the city of Providence.
so Providence has both legal and illegal guns.
Right, but they're very rarely, the legal ones are very rarely used in violence. So if you remove them, you haven't addressed the violence issue.
But we've shut off the pipeline
Um,
for the acquisition of illegal guns.
They'll just come from elsewhere. I mean, it's been illegal for how long to not have marijuana in this state? But there's plenty of it around because there's a market for it. So even if you get rid of all of the guns, they'll still be here illegally. If you get rid of all of the people that, I don't know, grow marijuana, it's still here illegally. It's not going to stop it from happening.
Right, and that's why I think the end goal that perhaps we can agree on is safer streets and an end to senseless gun violence, right? And so I think the solution to meet that end goal is not just getting rid of guns, but addressing the problem, you know, which is gang activity, poverty, all these other things that we agree on.
Poverty.
But that's a piece. It's not the only piece of the puzzle. And so the way in which we address that, one of the ways in which we address that are these community groups that are doing really good and important work, offering healthy recreational opportunities as an alternative, offering counseling, family support, all these things that we know work. And that's why I do think we need to be supporting them. Just addressing the illegal gun issue is not the only way. What we also have to do is support these community groups that are doing the important work, and they need funding. And this is how I think we should go get it.
Concentrating on our economy and getting prosperity back into the neighborhoods that we're having all of these problems. We don't really have these kind of problems in Barrington. There's a lot of prosperity in Barrington. The two do correlate. If we can improve the economy in Providence and make sure these people have a real choice between I can go into street violence where I'll probably be dead by my 25th birthday, or I can go to work down at Electric Boat welding for $50 an hour. Right now, we can't fill the jobs down there because we don't have an educated workforce. There are jobs down there, and there are jobs all over the state that go unfilled because we haven't educated our workforce, and people can't get to the jobs. They're not prosperous enough to even be able to get to the job for the first time. So there's a lot of different barriers with concentrating on making Providence more economically sound will correct all of the issues or most of the issues that you're talking about. But I'm not hearing you talk about that. You just want to fund nonprofits to try to educate people on why they should stay out of gang violence, but they're there because they're not allowed another avenue for prosperity.
Yeah, well, we can do this again on jobs and economic development, and we about 10 days ago released a 17-page plan on an economic development plan for the city of Providence, and I think I'm the only candidate for mayor that has a specific economic development plan that I encourage you to read, and I do am interested in having a very long conversation about how we're going to improve our economy, and certainly it's a tragedy that these good high-paying jobs exist all over the state, and yet we don't have qualified or work-ready workers to take those jobs. That's a real problem. And so my focus on addressing the gun violence in our community is not to say that we can't do both things at once. We can have a mayor who walks and chews gum. And so we can work to make our streets safer and address gun violence while still growing and expanding our economy and improving our schools. Because again, all three of these things are interrelated, and so I'm eager and anxious to have that conversation.
They are interrelated. I will tell you that they're interrelated, but the weight on the entire system is our tax system. And relieving that tax system will allow all of those things that you want to have happen. That would actually allow it to happen. Putting another tax on top of it all is just not the way to go. That's where we're going to disagree.
Do you support raising the minimum wage?
No, I do not.
So, I mean, I think we can agree that one of the best ways to combat violence is to give a man or a woman a job. But it has to be a job that is a viable alternative. And I don't want to pretend to know exactly the remuneration available to those involved in gang activity and selling drugs and things like that. But a $7 or $7.50 an hour job at McDonald's is not a viable alternative for most people. And to work full time and still not be able to make ends meet isn't going to deter that young person from gang life. And so for the piece of the puzzle that is economic opportunity, we need to make sure that it's real economic opportunity, that it's opportunity that can support a family, that can allow for a person to work full time and be able to pay their bills and to live with dignity. And so certainly the jobs that you mentioned in Electric Boat meet that measure, but we need to ensure that it's a wide variety of jobs, that the young person is qualified because of proper public education to earn that good job, but that it also pays well enough to provide for dignity and a life that is one that's worthy of leaving the alternative.
The problem that I see with that first is we raise minimum wage, and now so many businesses are going to have to lay people off. So we've created more unemployment by doing it. At the same time, now $10.10 an hour, which I believe is the number that's on the table, right now, welfare benefits in the state of Rhode Island exceed $20 an hour. So that's considered a dignified living. But we've created more unemployment by just simply, those jobs were never designed to be the ones that you raise a family on. Okay? And we have to expand our economic prosperity so that people aren't being forced into those kind of jobs, because they're never going to be the kind that's going to afford you dignity. Just raising minimum wage is not going to address that problem.
It starts, and I don't
It
buy the
hurts.
argument that it's going to cause layoffs, particularly as both of our neighbors, Massachusetts and Connecticut, are going to a $10 an hour minimum wage, and so that we would find ourselves square in the middle of the pack. There's no competitive advantage to relocating to Connecticut or Massachusetts, and I don't find that.
All right, and we're not here to talk about the
It's all
minimum wage. That's
Right.
a little off topic. I'd imagine there are timeline concerns too. I mean, some of what you're proposing is not. There's no overnight fix. I mean, couldn't there be one bill that would solve all our economic problems? Probably not.
Probably not.
No.
We'd run you for governor if you could figure it out, right?
All right, here I go. Related to guns somewhat, though, there's been controversy about arming URI security employees recently. I'm interested in your thoughts on that.
Sure. So I support, if that's the decision that they've made between the local police department and the university administrators and the community, then that's what they should do. I think that local law enforcement, the educational institution, and the community, if they can find consensus on what's in the best interest of their safety, and the officers are then properly trained with very clear use of force guidelines, then they should have the freedom and flexibility to elect to arm or not to arm as they see fit. In my city, in Providence, the Brown University police officers are armed. The other colleges and universities are not. But again, I think that if we can come to consensus between the university security force, the local police department, and the community, and then we put these proper training and clear use of force guidelines, then I support a case-by-case decision making and let the communities decide what works for them.
Two things we agree on.
All right.
Blue cards,
Excellent.
Blue cards and URI
And
security.
URI security.
So
All right.
absolutely, there's very little opportunity with a situation, a campus like that, that the Kingston Police Department would be able to react fast enough, or as fast as the security police that are right there. And it really does come down to that first 30 seconds to a minute, where reaction is everything. And if the local security can get there in time and be armed enough to take care of the situation, we can avoid a lot of problems. So I'd like to congratulate you on your run for mayor. I know I have someone in the race, so I'm not going to endorse you for it, but thank you for being involved in the process.
Right, and thank you for your service too. I think we all benefit from a healthy debate, and two-party system is what most of the country enjoys, maybe a little bit more vibrantly than here. And while I'm proud to have been a Democrat my whole life, I think the conversation, the dialogue, and a debate of ideas is healthy for everyone.
Nice to meet you.
You too.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
And that's Motif TV. We'll see you next time.